This may sound crazy, but reading Enid Blyton books has done wonders for my mental health. Also, if this looks like your ideal holiday, we can be friends. Hi, I'm Rosie Blythe. I'm the author of the Princess Guide to Life book series, and on this channel we talk about everything from spirituality to finances to manifestation to books, and also dogs. Sometimes I don't know if you can see my dog, he's right here. But yeah, if you hear any heavy breathing, it's him, not me. So yeah, today is kind of a book and mental health one, because I realised recently that reading children's books is great for my mental health. I'm broadcasting to you from my childhood bedroom, so I hope you admire my hand-sponged walls. It was the height of fashion. And it also, this is where all my old books are, so lucky parents get to store my old belongings. Enid Blyton is famously one of the most prolific authors ever. She wrote so many books, and I think part of her genius is that she didn't stick to just one age group. She wrote for children of all ages, from the very young to teens, and well, I'm adult and I'm still enjoying them. And there is just something about the escapism of these books. I love a good thriller, but I don't always want to read something scary or taxing on my brain. And I tell you what, when you read these books, suddenly all of your problems, whatever's going on at work or in your life, will just fade into insignificance, because suddenly all you care about is, are these kids going to solve this mystery? She also made it sound really fun to go to boarding school with Mallory Towers and St Clair's and all those. And I have to notice, as a big fan of Sweet Valley High, I'll probably do a video on them at some point, she was the first one to come up with the idea of twins being at the centre of a social group. So kudos, Enid. So The Famous Five, this was the first book I read. It's battered, as you can see. I think these have been on like every holiday. When I was a kid, I would take them with me, like my comfort reading. Can't leave these at home. Yeah, I think there's a picture of me actually, which I'll try and find and put in here. But The Famous Five, they really are the most famous of Enid Blyton's creations. I think they're the most iconic. I guess because it was the most kind of fantastical wish fulfillment for children. You know, because the things like Mallory Towers and St Clair's, the boarding schools, probably equally unrealistic really. But the idea of going to school and having midnight feasts and kind of getting into trouble sometimes, not that out of reality. The idea of having an island that you could just go and stay on, and it's your island, and you discover gold in the dungeons and you climb down wells, it's all just complete fantasy for children. Grown-ups, nowhere to be seen. I have to say, if I was going to give a child these books to read now, I would have to mention a little caveat, which is, okay, Enid Blyton, she is racist and sexist and, you know, kind of offensive in every way. Books are kind of untidy now. The bad guys are almost always foreigners or gypsies, you know. So the kids will occasionally befriend circus folk or whatever, but it's always made a point of that they're kind of beneath the Famous Five. You know, they're dirty and they don't have manners. And literally, the Famous Five, they don't have manners, because they'll say things like, oh, well, yes, we'll come and visit your caravan, but I hope it's not too smelly. And I just think, why would you do that if you had a friend of a different social demographic? If you're not familiar with the Famous Five, Julian, Dick and Anne are siblings. Georgina is their cousin, and Timmy is Georgina's beloved dog. And so she likes to be known as George because she doesn't want to be a girl, because being a girl sucks in the 40s and 50s, it turns out. If you read the books, you can absolutely sympathise with her not wanting to be a girl in this era, because she's constantly told she can't do anything cool or fun, and she must do the housework with Anne. And Anne is a little bit annoying, to be fair, because she's always just like, oh, I don't mind, I love washing up. It's really quite shocking to me reading in the 21st century now, and it was shocking to me as a child actually. The boys will literally say, all right girls, you go and finish your jobs and then we can go. The jobs being, you know, making the beds or washing up or whatever. They are told quite explicitly, like, it's your job to do it because you're girls. And it's sort of set up as, oh, it's a fair exchange because, you know, girls have to do all the donkey work, but the boys protect the girls. It's like, oh, you know, when we tell you you're not allowed to do stuff, it's to protect you. But in their adventures, when they actually encounter like robbers and smugglers and kidnappers and things, the boys can't do anything anyway. Like they all get tied up, they all get like locked in dungeons together. So actually that exchange is completely pointless. The girls get nothing out of it. But as a child, I mean, I read these and I was like, well, that's a load of bullshit, isn't it? Like, what absolute nonsense. The sexism is so much more prevalent in these books than in any other of her series, and I actually wonder if she was subtly encouraging feminism by having this rebellion. She'll literally say things like, come on now, George, isn't it about time that you stopped thinking you're as good as a boy? I don't blame George for wanting to identify out of that, and good for her. It's no secret that Enid Blyton actually based George on herself as a little girl. Which makes it kind of stranger that she seems to sometimes just kind of ritually humiliate George. Like, George just makes a fool out of herself quite often. So yeah, that's weird of Enid. But in a way she's quite subversive because, you know, often the plot will be that Julian, you know, George wants to do something. Julian says, no, you can't do that because you're a girl. You silly little girl. I'm going to do it. And then George will just like go behind his back and secretly do the thing she wants to do. And she will save the day and it will work out much better than if she'd obeyed Julian. So there's a little bit of, actually, maybe Julian doesn't know everything he thinks he does. But I'm glad that there was a character like George in these books that kind of went, you know what, I can do this stuff. Just because the boys tell me I can't means nothing. There are probably fairly few writers in the world who I can read their books and just purely enjoy them, purely just read the books as they're meant to be read, but also enjoy them in a making fun of them level. So like Enid Blyton is one. I love Stephanie Meyer, I love the Twilight books, but at the same time I can read them and laugh at the ridiculous plot holes. And I think Enid Blyton is the same. You kind of like like there are certain motifs that she uses over and over again, like you know, when there are bad guys around, the children will start mooing like cows, and the men, the bad people, will always be like, oh, this is so scary, I can hear cows mooing where there shouldn't be cows, and they just like run away in fright. And you think about that, like really grown men hearing what would probably be quite obviously children mooing, making mooing sounds. I don't think they would be that scared, but Enid Blyton has this firm belief that they would run for their lives, which is, she uses it over and over and over again in all these different series. So yeah, Enid, you've got some issues. It never says where they go to the toilet. They'll sometimes talk about washing. I don't think they even brush their teeth, or they don't talk about it, but they'll say like, oh, we're going for a wash in the seawater. But yeah, they don't go to the toilet ever. The girls never get their periods, even though they must be well into their teens by the end. I think puberty is kind of mentioned in that I think Anne gets a spot and the boy's like, oh, you've got a spot, Anne. So yeah, that's about as hormonal as we get. Yeah, so it's a world without bodily functions. So we can actually work out how old the famous five are by the last book, because we know in the first one Julian is 12, Dick and George are 11, Anne is 10. So if we look at each holiday, whether it's like Christmas or summer or Easter or whatever, we can kind of work out how many years go by. By the last book, Julian is 24, Dick and George are 23, Anne is 22. So I don't know why they're still going to school. I think we just have to suspend our disbelief a little bit here. So in the famous five books, the kids go to boarding school in term time, and then in holidays they go off on their own, and you do kind of think, when do their parents see them? And I think that's probably a fair reflection of Enid Blyton's attitude to children, because she did have her own, and she, yeah, paid a lot more attention to the fictitious children that she wrote about. I always really like these covers, but I feel like there was a bit of confusion in the brief, because we don't have a huge amount of physical description of them. All we know is that George has very curly hair. So I don't know why there are two girls in these. One has very curly hair, and then the other one, who seems more likely to be George because she's dressed in a more sort of masculine way. She's not wearing high heels in the pictures. She has short hair, so I don't know which one is meant to be George. I presume it's that one, but it just seems a strange choice. I found it very confusing as a child. I also had a little crush on Dick in some of these pictures. Look at him in his brown leather jacket. So hot. One thing I didn't really realise was that Enid Blyton taught me mindfulness. If you've read these books before, you'll know they kind of follow a formula, you know, the famous five that always start out, is the school holidays, what are we going to do? Let's go camping, let's go caravanning, let's go cycling, let's stay in this farmhouse. let's, camp next to the circus. There are all these things. But before the adventure starts, so before they discover, the smugglers or the treasure map or whatever it is, they'll just be chilling. They're just enjoying their holiday and enjoying being together, and they will comment on it. They'll be like, isn't it lovely the first week of the holidays? Or isn't it nice to all be together? And they really take that time to just enjoy the moment. And I don't think I've read any other children's books that do that. I think that's really unusual. So I remember when I was a kid and I was in junior school, and I remember coming home from school, everyone used to go to the same sweet shop. So I'd gone in there and I'd got like a comic, whatever I was reading at the time, and I bought a bar of Swiss chocolate because I was quite the connoisseur of chocolate. I also used to buy myself boxes of chocolates. Like, I was all about the self-care. Obviously my parents didn't mind. They were like, hey, it's your pocket money. So I used to buy myself a box of chocolates as a little treat. I should have started writing about self-care when I was that age, because I obviously let down. But yeah, so on this particular day I had a comic, I had a bar of Swiss chocolate. It was a Friday afternoon, and I remember just taking a moment to just think, I don't have a care in the world. Like, I literally thought those words because I was like an old-fashioned kid apparently. And it's so funny. It's almost like I remember like kind of thinking, oh, but I have that school project that I'm going to have to do next week, and I've got a bit of homework. And I was like, no, right now, I don't have a care in the world. I remember it really vividly now, so it obviously kind of like went into my head. But I think it's so important to just take that, like, take a moment, whatever you're doing, like, maybe you've just got your baby to sleep and you can just go, right now, my life is perfect. Or maybe it's a Friday and you don't have to go to work until Monday morning and you're like, that's Monday's problem. Right now, I'm doing great. And I think Enid Blyton really helped me to learn to be mindful like that, because if you keep reading about characters who are always like, oh, isn't this nice? We're doing such a fun thing. Isn't this food delicious? I think it helps just to teach you to do that. Everyone always remembers the food in the Famous Five, and it's worth noting that these books were written during the war and just after the war, so like from 1942 onwards, while Britain was still having food rationing. So all of these descriptions of these amazing meals, it was while everyone was, having these, I don't know if you've seen pictures of what British people had as their weekly rations that were pretty tiny, like no wonder everyone was skinny. So it was almost like food porn, and they were always stopping at farms, and I was like, I'm pretty sure farms had to be rationed as well, so they're probably just illegally sharing their food. But war is not mentioned. I think the closest they come is when there are some pilots who one of them's accused of being a traitor, like, oh, how dreadful to be a traitor to your country, but traitor to who is never mentioned. So war just does not exist in this world. And I think really that's the best way. It's just escapism. Like, you don't want to be reading about war when your, kids are going camping. So I think that was a good call, really, of Enid Blyton's.
And these descriptions of food, they're really all about mindfulness again, aren't they? Just looking at what you're about to eat and really appreciating it. And I think we all have memories of particular meals that we've had that have been maybe a little bit special, like on holidays or trips that we've had. I can still remember just a random carrot cake I had in a cafe in Australia. I'm never going to have that particular carrot cake again, but I still remember it because it was so good.
There are always these really rich descriptions of what they're eating, these amazing picnics and amazing meals. Sometimes it sounds good. Sometimes I'm just like, this, like, they'll just be like, oh, lettuces, radishes, and you're like, are you going to have some dressing on that salad, or are you just going to just have it all dry? Okay. But sometimes it sounds really good, it's like jam tarts and cakes and like tinned pineapple and ginger beer and all this stuff. And some of it's sort of dated, like I don't think many children now would be that excited if you said, oh, do you want some gooseberries and cream? But the Famous Five, that's like the best thing ever. So starting with The Children of Willow Farm. I think The Children of Cherry Tree Farm came first, and we've got More Adventures of Willow Farm. So these made me obsessed with living on a farm, that whole idea. And it was weird because I wasn't like a dominant child. I was definitely that quiet one on the periphery of the group. But somehow my enthusiasm for those books must have been so strong, because I remember I got my friends to play farms with me every playtime for like a year. So I was really lucky, and you could call this an early manifestation, before I knew what manifestation was, because my brother went to a school which had a farm attached to it, and my dad started volunteering there at weekends, so I would go along when I was like 7 or 8, and just basically live the life of someone growing up on a farm with only working at weekends. So it was pretty great. I got to just like see baby goats being born, collect the eggs. So yeah, I really got to experience all the best bits. So I count myself extremely lucky, because living on a farm, I think there are quite a few programs now, aren't there, at least in the UK, sort of romanticising it a little bit, like, oh, look at this lovely family in their little hand knitted pullovers, living life like it's 50 years ago, and it just looks really idyllic, but it's such hard work. So kind of glad I don't live on a farm now, to be honest. I also love these farm books, so Six Cousins at Mistletoe Farm. I also made my friends play this because they're like the country cousins, and then the city cousins come to stay, and they don't know what to do in the farm and make fools of themselves. But then, you know, through hard work, they realise that working on a farm is great. I think that was the gist. I'll have to read them again. The lesser known books, let's have a look. Secret Seven, I was never very into, to be honest. I think if I remember correctly, they would sometimes refer to reading books about the famous five. Like Enid Blyton was just doing a little bit of marketing within her own books, just plugging other books within the series, like, oh, let's read a famous five book, they're so exciting. But yeah, the Secret Seven, there were just too many of them. They didn't really have very well formed personalities. And also the boys just ended up doing everything. There wasn't anything for the girls to do. They'd just get left behind. The whole adventure would just be like the boys going doing stuff. So I found that boring. Dog's sitting on them now, so I can't find it. Here's a really old cover. So the Five Fine Doubters and Dog, they were sort of famous five counterparts. And I'm surprised that they don't seem as well known. Like even the Secret Seven are more famous, I would say. The Five Fine Doubters and Dog, I think, in some ways, are preferable to the famous five. First of all, in the famous five, Julian is such an annoying leader. He's so bossy. He's so full of himself. He always thinks he's right, although he very rarely is. So in the Five Fine Doubters and Dog, we have Fatty, who is a much better leader. Even though Enid, again, she's like in love with him. The way she writes about him, she's like, oh, everyone like envied him in his class at school. But he's just got more humility, and he doesn't like boss people around. He's just like, okay, well, let's do this then. So he's actually a better leader. So let's have a look. When did she write these? So I wonder if she kind of learnt from her. Yeah, these were slightly later. So I wonder if she kind of learned, I don't want to say from her mistakes, because I'm sure some people like Julian. But I wonder if she was like, oh yeah, let's make him a bit more likeable. They have this rival, which is quite fun. They have the village policeman called Mr. Goon, who they always manage to outsmart him. They're actually pretty horrible to him, and they they do things that, in reality, these days at least, would be highly illegal. Like they literally will like intercept messages between the bad guys and not tell the local policeman. They leave false clues around a lot because they just think that's a laugh. So they're actually pretty terrible people. So many of the plots hinge on Fatty disguising himself, and everyone around him, including the local policeman, is fooled. I think when you're reading the books you can suspend your disbelief, but I think in a film that would be much harder to pull off. So I think maybe that's why there haven't been any, to my knowledge, any film adaptations of the Five Fine Doubters Dog. But that's okay, they can just live in our imagination. But they're definitely worth reading.
And I think part of the mindfulness that we were talking about is just enjoying coziness, you know, from the food to like, there are lots of descriptions of when they're like snuggling down in bed, like, oh yes, we're having an adventure, we've got to get a good night's sleep on your little bed of heather that you've made for your campsite. And in the Five Fine Doubters and Dog, they're always going into like little cafes and having hot chocolate and macaroons and sitting around the oil stove in Fatty's shed to discuss the clues. So it's all just magical and super cozy.
There is nothing like going to bed with a hot chocolate and an Enid Blyton book. Trust me on this, you will feel better. It is escapism of the very highest order. Thank you for joining me on this trip down memory lane. I hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know your favourite Enid Blyton books. And the dog's panting. Dylan says thanks for joining us. And thank you for liking the video. Thank you for subscribing to the channel. And I will see you next time. Bye. Hi everyone, I'm Rosie Blythe. I'm the author of the Princess Guide to Life book series, and I'm accompanied today by my dog Dylan, who's climbing all over the books that I carefully laid out. Right, Dylan, you're not gonna mess up the books, are you? Can I sit this side, darling? Do you want to sit up at this end? What are you doing? Oh. Okay, so I think yes, he is gonna mess up the books. Oh, it's a fly. So I had all the books really nicely piled next to me, and then the dog has decided he wants to come and sit next to me, which is adorable, and I can't say no. It's fine. It's fine. Just sit on my treasured childhood books. Dylan, don't squish them. Don't squish them. Don't eat the book. No, don't eat it. You can sniff them, but not eating. Okay, the dog's with me again. What have you done with 5 on a treasure island? I think it's under your bottom. Is it under your bottom? Is it under your bottom? Dylan's being a bear. Are you a bear? Dylan's keeping all those books safe for me. Thanks, Dylan.